Hello, everyone, and welcome to 16 Stories of Feminist Activism webinar. My name is Alex Johnson, and I'm the main coordinator for this project. Thank you all for joining us this evening to hear the inspiring stories of the activists that were part of this collaborative campaign. The 16 Stories campaign was developed in recognition and celebration of the global initiative, the 16 Days campaign, which recognizes activism around gender-based violence against women. The campaign started on November 25th, International Day Against Violence Against Women, and ends today, December 10th, on International Human Rights Day. Our collaboration alongside the 16 Days campaign invited everyone who engaged with feminist activism throughout the 2020 year to submit their stories and to help build a community around the purpose of change in a multitude of areas. We aim to celebrate the incredible and ongoing activism of activists in New York, around the country, and around the world, all of whom have worked very hard to lift up this difficult year. So tonight we'll hear from each of our activists in turn, and each will give a brief overview of their project, their inspiration, and perhaps even their future endeavors. Following the presentation, we will open things up for a Q&A session. You should see the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to submit a question at any point during the activist presentation, and we will try to get to as many as possible at the end of the seminar. Please also note that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared online. So as you all likely know, the 16 Stories campaign was made possible by a collaboration of three wonderful organizations. The first is the Center for the Study of Women in Society at the Graduate Center. The second is the academic journal Feminist Anthropology. And the third is the academic journal Women's Studies Quarterly. I would like to invite a representative from each of these organizations to speak briefly on who they are and what they do. First, Eileen Liang from the Center for the Study of Women in Society.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Eileen Liang, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Center for the Study of Women and Society. We are delighted and so excited to be celebrating 16 Stories of Feminist Activism. The center is housed at the Graduate Center CUNY and is 45 years old. We provide exciting public programming. For example, we'll have Jackie Woodson next spring. And we oversee the MA program in Women and Gender Studies and the Women's Studies Certificate Program for PhD students in any discipline at the Graduate Center. We are so excited to be collaborating with Feminist Anthropology and Women's Studies Quarterly. So welcome, we're really excited.
Thanks, Eileen. Next we have Samina Mullah, one of the co-editors of Feminist Anthropology.
Hi, everyone, and I know you're here to hear these amazing stories and feed your soul, so I'll make it quick. I am the co-editor along with Donna Ayin Davis of Feminist Anthropology. Donna Ayin is also the director of the Center for the Study of Women and Society, and so we get to collaborate a lot. It's been a pleasure to work across the two journals and with the center. And we're a new journal, so I will drop our website into the chat. We just published our second issue, and two of the activists you'll hear from today are featured in the first and second issue. And our goal is really to find the edge of scholarship as praxis and push beyond the ivory tower. So you'll let us know if we are or aren't meeting that goal. Thank you and welcome. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more about this inspiring work that I've been reading up on Twitter.
Thank you, Samina. And finally, the co-editors of Women's Studies Quarterly, Brianne Wakehoff and Red Washburn.
Hi, thank you, Alex. I'm Brianne Wakehoff, one of the co-editors of Women's Studies Quarterly. We've been around since 1972. We're an interdisciplinary forum for the exchange of emerging perspectives on women, gender, and sexuality, published by the Feminist Press at CUNY. We have several great editorial assistants through the Center for the Study of Women in Society, and we're thrilled to be part of this partnership. Particularly excited about the ways that 16 Stories of Feminist Activism highlights the importance of activism to our mission. Activism established women's gender and sexuality studies as an area worthy of academic research. And we find that academic research is most meaningful when it connects back to activism. Additionally, the creative arts can be both scholarship and activism, and showcasing this type of work on a digital platform allows us to think about all of these possibilities for creativity, activism through the mode of digital publishing. I want to turn it over to Red.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Brianne. I don't have too much to add because they covered much of it, but I want to first start by thanking Alex for organizing this event, and also to Amy and Ivy, who are participants and very involved in it as well. It's been really an honor to work with the editorial assistants at the Grad Center in Women and Gender Studies. I also want to thank Dr. Donna Davis and the Center for the Study of Women in Society, as well as Dr. Kendra Sullivan at the Center for the Humanities. So WSQ has been delighted to work with these centers and enrich the collaboration in the spirit of feminist research, scholarship, and activism. It's been really intellectually rewarding as well as personally and creatively. And I'll just add that besides the collaboration aspect, I really love the idea of using storytelling as a way of expressing truth, and also to speak truth to power as a form of resistance during this very critical moment. So I tip my hat to Alex and to everyone who organized it. I'm really looking forward to hearing from everyone today. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you to both Brianne and Red, and thank you to all three organizations for participating in our collaboration. I also want to thank Amy Affritt, Ivy Bryan, Joseph Godot, and Clarissa Gonzalez for helping to put this entire campaign together and helping it run smoothly. But now let's hear from our first activists, Holly Walters in the Me Too Anthro Initiative, who submitted a piece titled Me Too Anthropology and the Long Journey Home.
Thank you all so much. And thank you all for being here. I know we're all getting very tired of Zoom at this point, but this is still a really exceptional lineup of activists, and we are incredibly honored to be a part of it. So my name is Holly Walters. I'm here on behalf of the Me Too Anthro Collective. The Me Too Anthro Collective is a group of early career and graduate students and young scholars who were originally formed back in 2015. And we began as a sort of loose collective spread over multiple countries. We now have representatives in the United States, the UK, New Zealand, Aotearoa, and Australia. And what we started with was with this understanding that, particularly in the social sciences, in anthropology, sociology, psychology, very commonly graduate students and early career researchers are asked to do solo fieldwork. This could include ethnographic fieldwork. This might be an archaeological dig. This might be lab work in any sort of variety of iterations that this work deals with. But all of the resources about sexual harassment and sexual assault tend to be focused around campus events and campus-wide resources that tend to be available, usually focused on undergrads. But due to both my experiences in the field and the experiences of many of my colleagues in the field, we began to see this very significant gap in that if you were assaulted in the field or experienced significant harassment in the field, there was nothing for you. There was nothing for you in terms of resources in the place that you were in. And very commonly, your university or your institution simply either had nothing to help you with, they didn't know how to help you, or you were simply dismissed. And this could mean the loss of your career. This could mean the loss of your graduate program, the loss of your degree. And this, by and large, tended to affect women. It particularly affected women of color, and it was affecting the queer community almost more than we had understood beforehand. So the Me Too Anthro Collective formed after that, and our first big push was the creation of the Long Journey Home. The Long Journey Home is an open access set of seminar materials, which includes a student handbook, a faculty handbook, and a template for running a seminar with your students so that you can begin to broach these conversations, as well as begin to understand what resources exist in the world and what resources that your institution might need to develop in order to support these very precarious students. It's available open access on our website, metooanthro.org. That was the beginning of Me Too Anthropology. Since then, we responded to events that happened at the SAAs just this past year, where an abuser was allowed to attend a number of panels along with the survivors of that abuse without their warning. And many people initially began to wonder right away, what can we do in the moment? What kind of action plan can we have on the ground at the time? This led to our second open access publication called the Best Practice Guidelines for Action at Conferences and Action in the Moment, also available open access on our website. Today, we have begun to shift our thinking a little bit more as we as an organization are slowly beginning to grow. We're slowly beginning to reach out to other fieldwork organizations all across the United States and all across the world. And so what we have now begun working with is the journal Commenting Ethnography to begin building a special issue that's going to foreground these voices that have heretofore gone unheard and unpublished. So we have now a number of collaborators who are going to be writing in terms of their relationship of race and fieldwork and gender, as well as queer studies and race and gender, particularly as it relates to the practice of anthropology and the practice of the social sciences. That's now going to be coming out from Commenting Ethnography at the end of next year. We're really excited about it. We have a really wonderful lineup of activists and scholars and young researchers who are going to be joining us. And more so, what we are now looking forward to as we continue this work is building our platform, continuing to build our activist space. We're unfunded. We're at this point a very small collective, but we're doing what we can. And the more we grow and the more we're actually able to reach out, the more we begin to understand just how pervasive this issue is that has heretofore gone unheard. And so our goal as the Me Too Anthropology Collective is to be a space for young researchers and young scholars, as well as to be that forefront in advising mentors and older scholars and institutions not to forget that these students exist. And when these students eventually go on to become the new generation of anthropologists, psychologists, and sociologists, that they too are prepared to have these conversations with their students and with their colleagues as well. So thank you all for allowing us to share your space very briefly. We're very much looking forward to the new Commenting Ethnography special issue. It will be out. Our plan right now is by December of 2021. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Holly, so much. Next, we're going to hear from Andy Sauer, who submitted a poem titled Woman Affronted.
Okay. Hi, my name is Andy Sauer. So again, I'm so honored to be featured among these incredible activists, and I want to thank the people who worked on this campaign for making it happen and for bringing together such an inspiring group of people. I'm here because I wrote a poem called Women Affronted, and it's about the abusive relationships that many of the women in my family endured. I wrote this poem in response to a feeling of hopelessness, in response to feelings of anxiety about any kind of vulnerability. It came from a place of feeling like I could never find a partner I could trust, because I grew up hearing my mother's opinion of men in general. And I can't blame my mom for imparting this feeling on me as a teenager. That was what she had learned, what she knew, what she knows, what she learned from her mother, from her father, from her first serious boyfriend, from her first husband. And I do know kind men exist, but I've always looked for red flags in every potential partner I meet. They can't cook, they're too quiet, they don't get along with their mother, they're too smart. I need to watch out, hold my breath while I wait for the other shoe to drop. Because that's what I learned to do from the women in my family who spoke to me about their own experiences with abuse. That's what I learned from my father that I needed to do, or I'd end up with a man like him. So statistically, we know that women are far more at risk of facing violence from their partners than from strangers. My family knows this, and so I learned to be cautious, to be anxious, to protect myself, to close myself off. But I don't want my generation to have to be reminding our daughters that they need to watch out, that they need to be careful, be ready to flee their partners at any sign of impending abuse. I want our daughters to have the freedom to feel safe in seeking out love. And I don't know how to make that happen. But I do know that storytelling is a crucial form of activism, that we are living through a time of reckoning, at least for certain abusers, because their victims had the courage to come forward and tell their stories. To that end, this poem, Women Affronted, is part of my story. And I'm working on Unlabeled Part 2, a series of workshops on intersectionality and identity, which will take place during the month of January 2021, in order to create a safe space for my fellow students to share their stories. I will also be helping to create a show featuring these stories, which will premiere on YouTube sometime in March. Our call for participants is available on the website created by this campaign. If our stories have an impact on even one person who wasn't willing to listen before, if our workshops manage to create a space where even one student who wasn't able to speak out before can feel comfortable sharing their stories, then maybe we've made a difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andy. Next, we hear from Nancy Francis, who submitted a collection of photography titled 8 Marches and 8 Pictures, a Basque Feminist Momentum.
Hi there, hi everyone. At the risk of sounding repetitive, once again, thank you for this honor to be here with you, some credible artists, activists, and academics. So I'm Athanasia Francis. I'm currently based in the UK, and I'm a second-year PhD student at the University of Liverpool. So I am an interdisciplinary activist researcher, but also I'm involved in transnational feminist activist initiatives, collaborating with fellow feminist activists, both local and diasporic, such as myself, from Latin America, from the UK, from Spain, and more particularly from the Basque Country, which is where this material, this photography comes from. The way we are sort of connected, our belongings, our loyalties, or kind of, well, our trajectories, if you like, are entangled in sort of many ways. It's quite multi-layered for us. Most of us are, myself included, rape survivors, or have experienced different types of macho violence across our contexts. A lot of us, again, myself included, are immigrants and or minority language speakers in our contexts. So that's kind of part of the multi-layer connections amongst us. At this point, I'm going to share my screen, if that's all right. So you have a visual sort of element there. Can you see my screen? So given this transnational kind of prism, it kind of transpires that there is a rather very prominent pattern, or rather two of them. So the first one is the omnipresence of gender violence across our contexts. But also what transpires is also the care and the solidarity and the effective activism as well. So my work hopefully reflect this polyphony, this diversity, but also in relation to those different social agents and these different claims that are entangled. So the feminist, the LGBTQ, disability, race, and as is the case with the Basque Country more particularly, independence, community independence, and autonomy claim as well. They all seem to sort of effortlessly merge when it comes to pointing out this omnipresence of patriarchal violence, of this terrorismo machista. And what also I think transpires is this dynamic, this impactfulness of our collective resistance, and perhaps also these new belongings, these new connections, this new these new feminist geographies. And hopefully some of these aspects are captured in my photography, in my work, and I'm glad to be able to share this with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy. If you would just unshare your screen. Thank you. Next we hear from Bahar Agu, a member of the Set Them Free initiative, who submitted a short documentary on her experience with Turkish refugees in Athens, Greece.
Thank you so much for having me. I want to start with some background information on the organization that I'm a part of, which is Set Them Free. Set Them Free is a civil initiative founded to stand up for the rights of the arbitrarily imprisoned mothers, babies, and women victims of the Turkey Purge. And apart from advocating for the rights of these imprisoned women and children, Set Them Free organizes online English and German classes to assist refugee women in their resettlement countries. And I actually went to Greece last year, and I was able to speak with some of these refugee women, and I collected some of their stories in my video. And here I'm going to go ahead and share 2 of the stories from my video.
Bu arada benim bazı sağlık problemlerim oldu. Göğsümde bir kitle oluştu. Geçmiş olsun. Burada bazı kontroller yaptık. Kitlenin hala iyi huylu mu kötü huylu mu olduğunu bilmiyoruz. Biyopsi yapılması gerekiyor. Çocuklarım yanımda olmadığı için bu süreçte biyopsi yaptırmak istemedim. Atina'da bir de bunu yaşamak istemedim. Kötü huylu derlerse ne yapacağımı bilmiyorum çünkü. Ama ben inançlıyım. Allah'ın izniyle inşallah. Kötü huylu değil o. İnanıyorum ve çocuklarımla çok güzel günler geçireceğim.
Başta hani evlerimize ateş düşmüş gibi nitelendiriyordu insanlar ama şu an görüyoruz ki daha film bitmedi. Çok zor bir süreçten geçtik ama burada iyiyiz. Arkadaşlarımız sürekli ziyaretlerimize geliyor. Bizi ne kadar sevdiklerini, unutmadıklarını, sahip çıktıklarını görüyoruz. Çok duygulanıyoruz. İçimizde yeniden ümitler yeşeriyor. Hayatın değişeceğini düşünüyorum. Evet, çok kötü, çok acı şeyler yaşadık ama evlerimizde ateş düştüğünü düşünmüyorum. Buna inanmıyorum. Hayatımızda temizlik yapıldığına inanıyorum. Fazla insanları, tüm maddi manevi fazlalıklarımızı attığımıza, gereksiz yüklerden kurtulduğumuza inanıyorum. Son cümlem duyuldu mu bilmediğim için tekrar etmek istiyorum. Başıma gelen her şey tekrar gelecek olsa ben yine sizlerle olmak isterdim. Yaptığım ilk bir şeyden pişman değilim. Sizleri çok seviyorum. Her şeye rağmen sizinle olmak için değerdi.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bahar. And next we hear from Neshka Diaz, who submitted a poem titled Poema or One.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It is such an honor to be in this space with all of you tonight. My name is Neshka Diaz. I'm about to finish my first semester of my master's degree in the Women's and Gender Studies MA program at the Graduate Center. First, I would like to thank everyone involved in the 16 Stories of Feminist Activism campaign for giving us the opportunity of sharing our art. This is the first time I publicly share a poem, and honestly, to be featured in the campaign along with amazing and talented people makes me feel more confident about my work and myself, so thanks again for that. I wrote the poem Poema Primero as a way of dealing with Alexa's death so closely. I didn't know Alexa personally, but I met her a few times at the coffee shop where I used to work. Alexa Negron Luciano was a homeless trans woman who was brutally murdered in Puerto Rico earlier this year. Her murder provoked outrage and has renewed the conversation in the archipelago about transphobia and other problems faced by trans and gender non-conforming people. I know it is not my place to talk about the problems that trans people face, especially if they are Black, because I don't know their struggles from first-hand experiences. But the sadness I felt with Alexa's death was through the reminder that both trans people and women in Puerto Rico suffer machismo violence every day, even from the government. Since 2018, La Colectiva Feminista, a Puerto Rican feminist collective, has been calling for a state of emergency to be declared due to the rise in feminicides, but the government of Puerto Rico has completely ignored this demand. Meanwhile, we continue to die, and for the police and the government, we are simply a statistic. We urgently need education with a gender perspective to prevent further murders and violence against women and trans people for simply deciding how to live our lives, identities, and sexuality. I hope that our work as intersectional feminists and activists will be enough to awaken people's desire and willingness to live in a world that is more just, not only with women, trans and gender non-conforming people, but to every minority in the world. May vulnerability and empathy reign in the future, and we may not only save lives, but also Mother Earth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nishka. And next we hear from Bezar Aradini, who submitted a collection of photography on her feminist embroidery work.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. I am a fiber artist here in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm going to share my screen with you here. Okay, so my artwork explores feminism that is transnational, local, open spaces for many voices, and provides critique of normative social formations. When you do a simple Google search on Kurdish women, all that appears are Kurdish women fighters in war, or mothers fleeing with their children wrapped in their arms. When Kurdish stories are told, it's usually from the perspective of a journalist covering the country's struggle towards self-determination. And in literature, individuals that are usually highlighted are mainly men who contributed to Kurdish history, but the same efforts of women have seemed to go unnoticed. For more context, the Kurds are about a population of 40 million people, the largest ethnic group in the world without its own nation. Kurdistan sits between Turkey, Syria, Iran, and Iraq. I utilized counter storytelling and embroidered images of womanhood and sisterhood to challenge the dominant representation of Kurdish communities, both from within and outside the community. Instead of presenting womanhood and sisterhood as monolithic categories, I stitched together how differences operate within the Kurdish community and challenge equivalence within these categories. I share stories of identities that have to be told and that are at constant risk of erasure. I stitched together the gaps in histories that have been forgotten and the complexities of Kurdish women's lives. My artwork is to promote equality, visibility, diversity, and to break Western stereotypes of the Middle East. As the refuge, passage, and resettlement rarely allow for the depth of lives to be carried across borders, my needlework inserts the stories of Kurdish women through their lives in Kurdistan, their lives in refugee camps, and their lives in diaspora. Thank you all again.
Thank you so much. So next we have Amanda Stoyanov, who submitted a piece on her Wikipedia editathon in collaboration with Art Now.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Alex. And I'm really honored to be here with everyone else tonight in this group. So I'm going to share my screen to discuss. So I'm a professor at Monmouth University, and I teach digital media and media art. So at the university, we decided to create an action campaign around Wikipedia Editathon. So this event was called Art Now, Art and Feminism, Wikipedia Editathon, and it happened on Friday, September 18th, 2020. Our rationale is that it is increasingly important for cis and trans women, gender nonconforming people, people of color, and Indigenous communities to be written back into history on Wikipedia. So when information systems like Wikipedia systematically exclude aspects of the human experience, our understanding of the world is incomplete. So to have access to a more accurate information system that includes representation of historically marginalized groups, our understanding of success, knowledge, and of ourselves can become more whole. So for this event, the faculty librarian, Lisa Iannucci, and I held an hour-long training introducing the Art and Feminism organization, its purpose and goals, and explained where and how to update and edit articles. We also instructed folks on how to use library resources to add credible citations. You can actually find this training video on the 16 Days website under my profile. It's important that I also cite and give credit to the organization called Art and Feminism, which is a nonprofit whose goal is to, quote, close the gaps in content and editorial representation on Wikipedia. Art and Feminism hold in-person, now virtual, edit-a-thons throughout the year. The organization has compiled a list of articles needing to be updated to represent the accurate history of cis and trans women, non-binary people, people of color, and Indigenous communities. So they have provided a tool, and then this tool can then be used by different organizations all over, and then shaped to, you know, in our case, give access to students to learn about this tool that they're often using, and then also add to the tool and be conscious of the information that is being populated, and take and know that they have agency over it as well. So over the course of this week of our event, so it went from September 18th to the 25th, we had a total of 25 editors, making 38 edits to 9 articles and adding 20 references, as well as other statistics such as articles viewed and words added, being in the thousands. The articles edited varied from Chicana feminism to individuals pages such as Sylvia Harris and Yael Bartana. We are planning to repeat this event every year. And this graphic was created by myself and a graduate student named Darcy Santella. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. So next we hear from Juliana Santos Walgren, who is speaking on behalf of Revibra Europe, a European support network of Juliana.
Hi, thank you very much. Do you hear me? Yes. Thank you so much for having selected our campaign, and we are so glad for being here with such inspiring women. I'm here on behalf of Revibra Europe, a European network which gives legal, psychological, and social support to Brazilian and Latino migrant women, but also on behalf of Mães de Aia. It's a Brazilian collective of mothers affected by the child abduction protocol, known as the Hague Convention. We are here also to call upon a modern review of this international agreement. It's important that we raise awareness about the disproportionate impact of child abduction treaty on women, and more specific on migrant women. 73% of the cases are instructed against women, while only 20% are instructed against men. I would like to ask Jennifer to share with us our video campaign, which was done in collaboration with Mães de Aia, Desi Reynolds, Thay Barroso, and Geraldo Monteiro. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Juliana. So next we hear from Kelly Thompson, who submitted a piece titled The Great Tumors Corner Sit-In, an Origin Story of Sorts.
All right, can you hear me? Thank you, Alex. And again, thank you to everyone. I am humbled and honored to be a part of this collaboration and this group of women and men. So I want to start with an introduction, and then I'll go through and I'll share my screen and show some images from our last 192 days of this little thing that I've started doing in a small town in Alabama, Auburn, Alabama. I'm a research professor at Auburn University. I study juvenile delinquency broadly, and around June 1st, like many people in our country, I was trying to deal with the heavy feelings of what was going on in the United States with the death of George Floyd and a lot of the national protests. And living in a small town, sometimes you can feel very alone in your activism. There are little pockets of us here and there, and every now and then we get together and we'll do big events, and it's very encouraging and exhilarating. But I was exhausted of those moments coming and going. I was really in need of something more sustainable, something daily that I could use to help me get through some of these heavy feelings. So I grabbed a protest sign that was already in my car. I didn't even have the energy to come up with words of my own. I grabbed the closest sign that was near to me, and I went and I sat at the busiest section of town that I could think of. And I just sat and I waited to try and figure things out, because I didn't know what sustainable action meant. I didn't know. All I know are planning big events. I'd planned protests before. I've planned marches. I've gone to marches. I've driven all over this country to go to marches. I'm no stranger to that. But what I am a stranger to is sustainable everyday action in a small town. What does that really look like? So yeah, I'll share my screen now to kind of show some of these things. Let's see. I think I've got to go to. Can y'all see? So these are some of the images from our Instagram page. I had some young people that started sitting with me early on, help me put together some of these things so that we would have some type of landing page that people could come to and interact with. And we actually get messages from people that say that this makes them very proud of their hometown, and people that say that they look forward to these daily posts that we have. And as you can see, there are these chalk drawings on the ground that happen every day. And what we started doing was the interactions, the positive and negative interactions throughout the day. Because what I started to be amazed from early on, from week one, was the fact that yes, there was negativity coming our way, and yes, there was positivity. There was every day someone who would come and sit with me. There's every day someone who would come and need to process this moment. Just going from the feeling of being very vulnerable and alone and sitting alone in that space to a feeling of, as you can see, lots of people join us every day. We dance together, we create art together, we figure out this moment together. I'll go ahead and stop sharing since it wants me to log into Instagram. I'm not going to bother doing that. But as you can see, a lot of the stories are there. The stories of how we're all trying now together as a community collective, not just one person on the ground, but a group of people trying to figure out this daily practice of civil discourse. And just very, very proud of it. Hope y'all check it out. Thank you for including me in this.
Thank you, Kelly. So next we hear from Marie-Louise Surratt, a co-founder of the Brooklyn-based organization Haitian Women for Haitian Refugees, who submitted 5 short poems, all addressing issues of racial justice, human rights, and gender-based violence. Marie.
Hey, hi, thank you so much, Alex, and the 16 Stories team, the Center for Women and Society and the Graduate Center, Feminist Anthropology, and Women's Studies Quarterly for their collaboration in realizing this project. This is really an important space to celebrate activists and their activism and the many ways, the myriad ways that their work take shape. And merci en pile, en pile. I also want to thank all the other participants whose artwork and stories are featured for their courage and their contribution to the struggle for human rights. It is no secret that the COVID-19 pandemic has hampered and impaired activism and rendered life very difficult for all of us and on all fronts, the personal, communal, social, political, and so on. For instance, before the pandemic, I facilitated a face-to-face group for survivors of intimate partner violence and abuse like myself at Haitian Women for Haitian Refugees. Moving online became a huge challenge. One, because the digital divide in poor communities is real. There were women who did not have the computers at home or had one device and had to use it for themselves and for their children, et cetera, et cetera. So in regard to my work, as a text that accompanies the poetry states, the pieces address issues of racial justice, human rights, and civil rights, gender-based violence and discrimination, and so on. It's important here for me to underscore that as a Haitian immigrant woman who hails and exists within such particular historical contexts, time and space, that is Haiti and the United States, both my artistic and academic work must be engaged in denouncing injustice. In other words, I do not have the time or privilege to produce art for art's sake. I have no issues when people can do it, but in my case, and for many others like myself, whose existence is massively impacted by colonialism, neocolonialism, slavery, and the continuous exploitation of labor, racism and sexism and so on, a string of systemic practices that dehumanize my art as well as my academic work cannot simply bask in aesthetics. And I'm going to step in and say that, yeah, I received my PhD from the CUNY Graduate Center a few years ago from the Urban Ed Department and do have a certificate in Africana Studies as well. And I do teach at the local CUNY schools. In terms of aesthetic, my art is an engaged art, and that's the point that I wanted to make. It not only because I'm aware that poverty is not pretty, gender-based violence, abuse is not pretty, discrimination, injustices are not pretty. That said, the poetry pieces presented here denounce inequities, injustices, and also endeavors to affirm identity, advocate for linguistic and cultural rights, and to shed light on acts and practices of resistance. The Haitian Creole piece titled La Prière Guidée, of which I provide an English translation, was my way of externalizing the fear and frustration, the anxiety and anguish that I was experiencing as I learned too frequently about family members and friends and so many others in the New York Haitian community who were being devoured by COVID-19. It is my response to the dangers of health disparities in my community, to the dangers of not having easy access to life-saving information in a language that one understands. And to conclude, I'm utterly thankful for this important space created by this collaborative and hope that the works that all of us have offered to share here inspire others. And lastly, that I'm looking forward to the other edition in 2021. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lily. So next we're hearing from Luigi W. Morris, a photographer for the Left Voice Collective, who submitted a collection of photographs of healthcare and COVID-related protests.
Hi, thank you. Yes, my name is Luigi. I'm a social photographer, member of this media outlet called Left Voice. Most of my photography work can be found there. Also, I am from Argentina, and I think it's important to mention that right at this moment in the House of Representatives of my country is being discussed the right for access to legal, free, and safe abortion. Like while thousands of protesters are taking to the streets to pressure this institution that has been giving its back to the women's movement for a long time. And regarding my presentation, on April 6th, I photographed 3 healthcare workers Sarah, Tracy, and Jillian, who joined and organized a protest at Harlem Hospital, New York City. It was one of the first main protests in New York City because of COVID-19. They demanded PPE, better working conditions, some transformations in the hospital, coordination with the related industries, like for example, to produce ventilators, etc. And they also protested against how the private hospital and the state were handling the pandemic. But apart from organizing in their own hospital, many healthcare workers like them used their strategic position during the crisis to raise the alarm on other aspects of the political situation. Many joined protests with other essential workers, protested against racism and police brutality, joined actions at other hospitals, participated in the BLM protest as medics, joined protests to demand the release of immigrants in detention centers that were overcrowded with a high risk of infection. And I will show the pictures just in case people didn't have time to see them. These ones were at the Harlem Hospital. And then I met Sarah at Amazon because this place has, I don't know, thousands of workers and didn't stop during the pandemic. Detention center that is in New Jersey. Again, all the names that you can see in the floor is people, immigrants that have been killed because of the pandemic. And this is Tracy, one of the first protests against police violence and police brutality. And to finish, like one of the goals that I have with photography is to show that workers can take up broader demands, fight for even more, than improving their own working conditions, and also to show the women who play a major role in organizing, like healthcare workers, teachers, and they are a really inspiration for other workers and activists to do the same. They have been at the forefront of advancing movements in our current political moment. And I feel like through this experience, they and other people realize their own collective power and give a more realistic and multifaceted look into social justice in the midst of an unprecedented pandemic and economic crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Luigi. So next we hear from Ivy Barrett Fox Bryan, who submitted a piece titled Finding and Using My Voice.
Hi, everyone. Okay, again, as everyone has already said, thank you so much for this collaboration. My piece is about how I came to be an activist in hopes that people can also find their own ways to become activists. So I've been an activist since I was 5 years old. My parents taught me that to always stand up for what's right. And I've been literally in protests since I've been 5. I didn't really find how to get back into activism other than protests until I was 18 years old. And I started working the polls for the election. And after that, I found that my form of activism was registering people to vote, as well as educating people on voting and making sure that people who aren't sure if they would like to participate in democracy at least get to hear the pros and cons. So I started not only registering thousands of voters in the past 3 years, but I also started publicly speaking to do outreach to voters. I was blessed with the opportunity to go on national television and talk to Soledad O'Brien about the youth vote. I was also able to headline, go right before the headlining act at San Francisco Pride to explain why pride and voting are intertwined. as well as get out the vote efforts and education efforts at RuPaul's Drag Con. And my activism has turned even more into gender-based voting rights. For those who don't know, there is a lot of suppression around gender variance in voting. So I've turned a lot more to that in order to get out specifically the queer vote, as queer people are often not considered a large voting bloc, but they should be. So yeah, that's pretty much like my story. And as of now, I currently do social media at Nerds Vote, which is an organization that's about voter education. And in the future, I look to do even more outreach for voters, as well as get to communities that have not been outreached to, such as like smaller community-led organizations, as well as like small collectives. So thank you so much for your time, and yeah.
Thanks, Ivy. And to finish up our presentations, we hear from Hasna Mokhtar, who submitted a piece titled Everyday Activism.
Thank you, Alex, and such an honor again to be here. I'm really humbled and grateful to share this platform with everybody. So just sharing my presentation, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I embody the foundational feminist ethics of the personal is political, so I'll start with my positionality. I'm Saudi American, I'm a survivor of violence, I'm Muslim, I'm a female, I'm a feminist, I'm an advocate, I come from a middle-class family, I'm light-skinned, I'm a PhD candidate, I'm able-bodied, I'm cisgender, I'm from a Zennial generation, and I speak both Arabic and English. When I started my journey into studying and researching gender-based violence, my idea of social change looked like this. It had to be grand, publicized, and organized. While this is necessary and vital, this framing made me dismiss individual active advocacy I was involved in. As I learned more, I realized the hidden, embodied, everyday feminist acts of resistance, service, and advocacy, and the small things we do when no one is watching matter as much. Individual acts, small drops, create a ripple effect of change. I wrote the essay, Everyday Feminism, where I put together 16 segmented pieces sharing my experiences, reflections, and inspirations from my everyday activism against gender-based violence in 2020. As simple as these acts might seem, especially in comparison to the amazing and huge work that is shared tonight, my belief is that they are crucial to the larger movement in feminist activism. Activism and courage and genuine social change is always a dynamic interplay between the personal and the collective, never just one or the other. I remain committed to my everyday feminism, but I also honor and celebrate these feminist legends whose grand activism has influenced and blessed my thinking, and whom I cite in my essay. Roxane Gay, Tarana Burke, Angela Davis, Les Lintz, Bell Hooks, Leanne Simpson, and Rosa Parks. Finally, I'm really grateful for the study of the Center for Study of Women, Feminist Anthropology, and Women's Studies Quarterly for recognizing that my small acts of activism are worthy to be featured today and for me to be part of this collective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hasna. And thank you to all of our activists. We're really proud to be able to support and celebrate all of you and all of your hard work that you've done over the past year. Thank you for submitting, and thank you for your continued passion and dedication to activism. Now, if everybody wants to turn their videos back on, we're going to move to the Q&A. So for all of our participants, you can go ahead and type any questions that you have in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to them if we can. I will start it off, though, with one of my questions. Let's start with Bezar. Your embroidery work is absolutely stunning. What inspired you to start working with fiber artwork, and what drove you to sort of present feminism in such a unique medium?
Well, thank you so much. So I graduated painting and I got so bored and was really just reflecting my family story of coming to America and their immigration story. And so I started asking my mom, like, what was it that got her through the days of refugee camps? Like, she was there for 4 years. What was her daily life like? And she said that she used rice sacks to do cross stitching. And so that honestly kind of motivated me to kind of find that balance of something that reflects of where I come from, who I am. Sewing is such a traditional medium for all cultures, but specifically in my house, it was just the way my mom communicated. So it became almost like a language bridge between me and my mother as well. So I started embroidery, and honestly just felt so intuitive and so natural that I just kept going with it. And I started probably 3 years ago. So embroidery for me just honestly represents so much. The process is therapeutic. It's ways of like healing. It's ways of healing intergenerational trauma, reflecting parts of my culture that I don't get to celebrate so much here in the States. So just all these things kind of brought me to this point of using family images, family stories, doing more research on myself and my family's histories, and trying to reflect on that and get a better understanding of these identities.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here.
Of course. I also want to invite all the panelists that if you guys want to chat with each other, you can absolutely ask questions. Talk over me, so I'm not asking all of them. Does anybody else want to jump in? If not, I can pull another question out that I have. I have a bunch. So I'll ask Hasno a question. You compared everyday activism and large movement activism. Do you see everyday activism as sort of building towards the larger movements, or that larger movements are sort of like the umbrella underneath, over which like everyday activism sits? Like, how do you see those two pieces working together?
I think both are important, as important. It's just that in my personal journey, when I started this work, you know, in my mind, it always had to be this way, or else I dismissed like little things that I was doing. And at one point I had to ask myself, like, why am I feeling like I'm not doing anything? Like I'm not contributing to the movement, like I'm not out in the streets. And so that does not mean that I'm not doing anything. And then that's where I started reframing how I look at what I do. And so back to your question, so both are crucially important. However, due to the, you know, the publicization of, you know, big movements, it kind of often gives almost one shape and form of what activism should look like. And my intent with writing the piece is to say, no, not everybody should be doing that. I mean, there are people who are doing that work. And then the rest of us maybe can engage also in these small things that nobody can see or nobody can hear about, but they are actually as important.
That's great. I really, that resonates with me a lot, right? Because we have, and that's kind of why I put you as the last speaker today, because it kind of represents the fact that we have this combination of, you know, big grand activism and everyday activism and everything in between. And I think it's beautiful. So we do have a question from the audience for Rezar. The question is, have you drawn on the unique embroidery, including prayer banners of the Hukul, excuse if I pronounce that wrong, Native Americans in your work? You should be able to see the Q&A too.
So I actually was raised Muslim, and so I actually do a lot of reflection even on my upbringing and the ways I studied the Islamic religion. And besides my portrait kind of embroidery work, I actually do banners that kind of reflect the in-betweenness of being raised Muslim, but also growing up in more of a conservative, a Christian population here in the South. And I kind of bridge those two together in my prayer rugs. But if that answered your question, it's kind of interesting you asked about prayer rugs, because I actually do kind of reflect on prayer rugs as well with my other work. I can actually write down my website if anyone would like to check out more of my portfolio. see.
I think the best, I don't know if they can see the chat, so I think the best way to do it is to put it in, to type the answer to their Q&A.
Wonderful. I see. Absolutely. I see it. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a question for Juliana. Yeah. So what was the motivation to the campaign? I'm not going to be able to pronounce that. What you and Mesa High expect to achieve? Hopefully you can read that because I'm kind of butchering it.
I think the motivation of the campaign was really the cruel reality of seeing mothers losing their children and being criminalized by that. So they have, like, they were most of them victims of domestic abuse. Then we would be re-victimized by the system, as also most of them migrant women, and also the fact that information is key. And when you work with women that are affected by violence, and also migrant women, but also are in international context, to find lawyers or solicitors that understand international affairs, family matters, and domestic abuse that intersect with migrant rights is so seldom that we really are here to bring more a different perspective that is very necessary to have a platform for multiple exchange and multiple learning. Me, myself, I was exposed to that. The organization that I created came from an incident that affected me. Although I'm a solicitor, although I'm a lawyer, I'm not, I'm also exposed to that. I'm also exposed to violence and abuse. And it came from this reality and this desperation where either you're put in a box of a victim of abuse or a box of a migrant needing protection of rights, but never in service that intersect. And that's why having intersectional approach when people deal with international abduction is very important, because we are not talking only about abduction and who takes one child over another place. We are talking about acts of desperation because there is lack of protection from the system. They are victims of structural racism. They are victims of systemic racism because they are racialized as migrant women. So that's the motivation behind the campaign.
Thank you, Juliana. We have a question for Ivy from Andy. Andy, did you want to ask it? You can say it if you want.
Yeah. So Ivy, I'm just wondering, kind of about your methodology, like what was happening between what you were doing every day between when you were 18 and now that like catapulted you to this place where you're such a like face of your movement. Like, how did you garner support for your campaigns?
Yeah, thank you so much for your question. Yeah, I mean, it came from kind of being a very young person who was extremely into voter registration. Of course, when I was 18, there was a lot of political unrest. And so I think it was like the perfect time for people to get involved. A lot of the ways that I actually garnered like so much interest was actually just working like and registering people to vote. I worked with an organization that would register people to vote at like concerts and festivals and all sort of events. And so through that, I started to become like well known in at least that circuit of people. And especially I think also part of it was that, you know, part of what I bring in my work is that I'm the daughter of a Jamaican immigrant. And for anyone who is Jamaican or knows anything about politics in Jamaica, it has only recently become safe enough for like people to vote en masse in Jamaica. When my father was growing up, he was not able to vote. It was just too dangerous. So yeah, I think that I bring that to the table, and I'm very motivated by that. And so I always want to share the story of immigrants who are voting. Alex, you're muted.
Yep, just talking to myself. Thank you, Ivy. Hasna has a question for Bahar.
Yes, thank you. So Bahar, I would like to hear more from you about the documentary. Like, how did you go about it? How easy was it to film with the women? Like, if you don't mind sharing a bit about the process, please.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So when we were there, our main goal was to just listen to the stories and then ask them, like, what can we do for you? Like, from your position where you are now, what can we do to relieve any of your stress, or just, is there anything you want us to tell other people? And a lot of the times the stories were really emotional, and they would, as you saw, like, they would be crying and such, or like they would have children and they wouldn't want their children to be nearby. And it was a difficult process, especially for them to explain it, because it's not the first time they're explaining it either, because you know, they've had to explain it other times too. And we basically asked them for permission if we could use these recordings for future projects, and they were actually really happy to do so, because they just want their voices to be heard, because where they are, they can't get their voices to be heard. So we just wanted to be the voice of those who can't speak for themselves, and I had to ask for special permission to show people's faces as well, which is why some of the faces were covered, just for like identity and security. Just like be careful about that. But yeah, it was a difficult and emotional process, but I think it went really well, and I think they were really glad to be able to speak up and have it be heard, especially on such platforms like this. Yeah.
Thanks, Bahar. Let's ask a question to Amanda. So you worked with librarians at your university to develop training videos, which I think is really interesting. What was the most important thing that you wanted to communicate with your training videos, and what sort of inspired you to do training videos for something like this? Was it sort of for sustainability? Could you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, thanks for that question. The training videos, I think, were part of just communicating virtually. So that event was supposed to be in person, and traditionally they are in person, those kinds of events, but we wanted to make sure that people could have access to it throughout the entire week. And I think that the most important thing we wanted people to learn was that, especially for our students, because they are like a main consumer of Wikipedia, that they can edit it. So like, regardless of if they learned how to edit it, it's actually not that difficult once you follow the video. I mean, it depends on your level of knowledge with technology, but once you are in and able to edit, yeah, so we wanted to just make sure that they know that this is a crowdsourced database that is full of biases, a lot of incomplete information, and much like our history books and other sources of information, but this is one where they can actually affect change and have some control over.
Excellent. And you said that you're doing it annually, right? Like you'll do it again next year?
Yeah, so that was our first one, and we're going to plan to do it next year, and I'd love to tell you all about it when that comes up.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. Question for Kelly. We sort of talked a bit with Ivy about growing community and things like that. So your campaign or your protests seem to be a very naturally growing situation. So can you talk a bit about like what you thought was the most important piece to growing that community, and how you said 148 days, I think you said, something like that?
Yeah,
well, how long? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're at 193 days. Yeah, so 6 months in, I think a couple of things come to mind. Is one, early on, we set little goals for ourselves. I think we were a little scared that we might not even make it to 100 days. And so we would set these little goals, and we've had what we refer to as seasons. And we set these small goals for us to make sure that we can stay focused, because there is negativity. There are really, really terrible things said, even with children present. Again, I think the most important thing is relationship building, right? And making it a daily practice. And that's really what's been very, very important. Even in the time of a pandemic, we're naturally very isolated right now. We're all feeling that. And we've made new friends. We've made friends that feel more like family now. We meet people that are walk daily with their, with their children or with their pets. And so we've started to just naturally, I think if you just allow yourself to be in a space and allow it to be a daily practice like that, the community's naturally going to form around that. And so yeah, every bit of it has just happened organically and just from showing up and making something a daily practice, and then cultivating the relationships that are coming from that.
That's amazing. And it's great that you got such a good turnout, and you keep getting such a good turnout. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah, and it's multi-generational too. We have young people, it's diverse in so many incredible ways, and we are pushed into these social media bubbles where we're only with people that are like us. And the algorithms are designed to work that way. And so, we have to do something to break out of that. And if it's sitting down on a corner and having a conversation with whoever walks up, that's one way.
That's great. Thank you. And congratulations. I mean, that's great.
Thank you.
Let's turn to Nishka. Nishka, I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about why you chose poetry as your sort of channel for the pain and the story that you wanted to tell.
I chose poetry because ever since I was like 15, writing is my way of feeling feelings. And while growing up, I'm not really surrounded by poets or musicians or writers in general. So I've always been kind of self-conscious about the things I write. So it is really just very personal for me, and that is why this is the first time I share publicly something I write. I just really feel like writing is a kind of art that lets me be free and express my feelings as I'm feeling them. And there aren't really other ways I can express myself in a healthier way than writing. And yeah, when the Alexa thing happened, it really hit me close, not only because I already knew who this person was, but also, like I said earlier, we are in such a bad situation here in Puerto Rico for women and gender non-conforming people. So when feminicides happens, it is impossible for many of us to feel indifferent, because it is a constant reminder that it can happen to me or to anyone I know anytime. And yeah, I just wish we can get to a point where it is actually there is actually hope for us to live in a country that cares about us and that has policies that actually saves our lives, not only as women and as gender non-conforming or trans, but also to Black people here in Puerto Rico and poor people as well. So yeah, that was my pouring belief from the situation, and that's why I chose the poetry.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing it for the first time. And that's very creative and amazing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Let's turn to our other poet, Lily. I was hoping that you could talk just briefly about the organization that you co-founded, the Haitian Women for Haitian Refugees. I would love to hear just a little more about it.
I'm glad to share a little bit more. Ninaj Raul and I met in Guantanamo back in 1992, where we both work as Haitian language specialists because following the coup d'etat in Haiti in 1991, there were many Haitians fleeing persecution and being killed, and the US intercepted their boats and housed them and kept them rather at in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, on the naval base. At one point, there were about 40,000 Haitians incarcerated there. And of course, then the Department of Justice needed translators to be able to communicate with these Haitians. So I, among others, were people who went down there to work as interpreters. And I met Ninaj Raul, who's the co-founder of Haitian Women for Haitian Refugees around 91. And in 92, when we returned from Guantanamo, very, very young, we had given a lot of the people our phone numbers. And as they were being paroled into the United States, they were calling our numbers, you know, what do we do, etc. So that's how Haitian Women for Haitian Refugees came about. We went to the local parish center, spoke to the priest. He provided us with some classrooms where we had group sessions for people, ESL classes, help him to broker the new system. And they gave us a closet as our office. So that was 28 years ago, actually. We were very, very young. And so it really was created to assist Haitians who were fleeing persecution and seeking refuge here in the United States. And of course, we do have a very, very small program for domestic or intimate partner violence survivors, particularly women who can benefit from the Violence Against Women Act because their spouse are using any means to deny them a documentation in the country, so on and so forth. So I am a survivor of domestic violence, and I been over the years been the facilitator for the group, and luckily because of the language and the culture, my fluency in the language and culture, it allows us to create very, very solid, good groups that are able to help these women heal or learn healing skills and manage and move on. And yeah, we are very much involved nowadays into the temporary protective status movement, demanding that the 14 countries, which includes Haiti, and have about we have about 60,000 Haitians who are on TPS and facing deportation at any time. So we are very much involved in the national TPS movement to demand that hopefully the Biden administration provide these people with documents so they can function, have a normal life in this country, because they do contribute a lot. They work, they pay taxes. Some of the children who are TPS holders have known no other countries but the United States. So we are there, you know, for 28 years we've been advocating, accompanying Haitian immigrants in the community.
Wow, thank you. I mean, that's incredible work, and thank you so much for sharing with us. Hopefully, I think just Googling at that should give people information on it.
Yeah, yeah. If you do Haitian Women for Haitian Refugees, we'd love you to visit, visit and stop by, see what we do. We do a lot of work. We've been around for a long time, and we do a lot of work in the community, despite the fact that the resources are always limited. So we're always, and we particularly do not want to accept. We will welcome people to fund us, but we don't receive money from the government because we don't want certain access to people who are already vulnerable, who are undocumented, who are, you know, who may, you know, have other issues that they're dealing with and would prefer remaining in anonymity. But we've been around and we're very respected in the community. We've done a lot of work in the community, and we'd love for you to Google Haitian Women for Haitian Refugees, and you'll see the work that we do.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lily. One of the last of my questions is for Andy. You talked a bit about the workshops that you're developing, and so I was hoping that you could just take a few minutes and expand a bit more on it and just tell people how to get involved.
Yeah, so this is actually the second installment of a storytelling project that I also worked on last year, and that also focused on showcasing students' original stories. And basically, I and two of my classmates in a women and gender studies class, I'm still an undergraduate, we read the Vagina Monologues, and we were just super inspired by it. And our professor had done a few productions of the Vagina Monologues, and we decided to continue that tradition, but with just students' original stories. But this was just last year, and the show was slotted to happen, I think it was the week that the shutdown happened, the week that CUNY shut down at the very least. And so we ended up pushing it to happen in June, and it was very challenging to keep students engaged, especially as, you know, quarantine was happening, the pandemic was happening, our motivations were all decreasing for this, like, for doing work in this new online world. But we did put together a storytelling show, which you can find on YouTube. If you Google Unlabeled Hunter College, it'll come up on YouTube. And this year we wanted to broaden our scope a bit, and instead of just focusing on a storytelling show, we wanted to do a series of workshops and invite students to just come and speak about their experiences. Like, our goal is really to find some connection in this new world. And, you know, just like I said during my talk, during my presentation, just create a safe space where students can be themselves and talk about their personal experiences, and then that will culminate in another storytelling show this year or next year.
Awesome. So one of the audience members asked a question for you at the same time I did. So a follow-up, what are some of the challenges of engaging the community when doing the storytelling project at CUNY? Or here at Hunter, yeah.
Yeah, so I think one of the major challenges is definitely just in general student engagement. It's like we're reaching out to clubs, like emailing club leaders, asking them to distribute our information, and, you know, are students checking their emails on a regular basis? Are clubs checking their social medias on a regular basis? Do students want to sign up for another thing when they're already stressed out, like engaged with their classes, when they're like looking forward to graduating, when they're already involved in their own clubs? Like, I think for a lot of people, this is just another thing on their schedule that they don't want, that they don't have time for. And so I think communication has been a major challenge, whereas if we were still in person, we'd have a table set up in, like, outside the cafeteria and, you know, just be aggressively like trying to speak to everyone who passes by. But at this point, I mean, we've been really struggling trying to find effective ways of reaching out to as large of an audience as we'd like to reach with this project.
I think that's a struggle that a lot of people are definitely feeling with the pandemic. But it's great that you're still doing it, or you're still trying to move it forward, and that's excellent. So I think we're gonna have to start wrapping up. I have a few more questions, but I don't want to run over time. Does anybody else have any like last minute things that they want to say, or are we all set? Good. All right, great. So thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you all for all of your amazing work. A reminder to the audience that all of these stories are available on the blog, which you can find linked in any social media page for any of the organizations that have collaborated on this. The blog will stay up indefinitely, so you guys can link it whenever you need to. And this video will be up on all of our social media sites as well as the blog for easy access. So thank you all again, and I hope you have a great night.